Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to class number 6 in our Boethius discussion, the Consolation of Philosophy. We are approaching the end. This should be our penultimate class. No, check that. This will definitely be our penultimate class. We're going to get through prose 1 of book 5 today. So we'll leave the big conclusion for next week. But we'll get through book 4 and the first section of book 5 here today. So that's going to be really great. Tonight's kind of where it gets real. In a sense, the whole rest of the book has been kind of build up to this. And where we go tonight is like I said, kind of where it gets real and where he starts talking about the big picture. So it's pretty exciting. Before we start, a really quick announcement. It is approaching July now. Jennifer asks if this is the first Mythgard class ever to be on schedule. You know, Jennifer, this has been much closer to schedule than normal, certainly. I have... You'll notice I'm pretty sure I've gotten through 100% of my slides almost every single class in this one, which is certainly a rare occurrence. But again, it's kind of, it's a different kind of discussion and a different kind of book. So, it's not exactly a fair comparison to our normal procedure. Anyway, all right. So, but as I was saying, quick announcement. It's almost the end of June, which means July is at hand, and so is our Hobbit Immersion Camp, which I'm super excited about. We have 66 chapters signed up across the country and a few in Canada, and so across North America, I suppose I should say. And I am delighted. We're going to have, we're looking at anywhere, somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 kids involved in the program this summer. So it's going to be really cool. And in fact, if you go to our website, I'll share that here, signumuniversity.org. Let's go back to the main page and show you how to get here. If you go to signumuniversity.org and then scroll down just a little bit, there it is, the Hobbit Immersion Camp page, and you click there and it takes you back to our page. If you scroll down on the page, you can see our cool new interactive map, which shows you where all of our individual chapters are located. So if you would like to join one of the chapters, you can check it out and look and see if there's one nearby you. If there is, awesome. Go to the library. Most of them are libraries, public libraries. Go there, talk to them, check it out, and see if you can get your kids or the kids plugged in. If you are not near one, or if like poor Lady Gun in the Twitch chat there, you couldn't get any libraries in Kansas to pay attention to you. And Lady Gun, can I just point out, look at this sad gap in the middle of the country, right? We really need chapters in Kansas next year. It's obvious. I mean, it's one of the most obvious things when you look at the map, right? But anyway, if you are not near a campsite, if you're not near one of our chapters, you can still totally participate. So if you have kids who would like to participate, just on your own, within your own house, you can totally do that. There's no reason it's not tied to libraries explicitly. If you wanted to get a couple families, like your kids and your kids' friends, right, and bring them together and do a chapter in your own house, you can totally do that. So if you're going to bring together a group of people, go ahead and fill out the group thing. If you're going to do it individually, you can fill out the family registration. Again, there are links to these up here. The library registration form, this is for groups. Anybody can do it, not just libraries. And the family registration and permission form, if you're just going to do it on your own, you can do it there. So we don't want anybody to be left out who wants to contribute. Just go ahead and sign up. It'll be cool. It'll be fun. It's designed to work together with libraries, but it's not absolutely essential. And Tony, note, we didn't end up getting any European ones this year. This is one of the things I realized. We started this up kind of late slightly late in the game anyway. Kind of far in advance for me, but these are librarians we're talking about, and librarians are way more organized than I am as a rule. So a lot of people, libraries and things, had already made plans and stuff for the summer. We're going to be a little bit more on the ball next year, and we'll be getting things together earlier. So I hope to persuade some Europeans to join us next year, because it's awesome. And actually, our live classes are going to be taught from Europe. Dime Binkley, our teacher, is actually going to be teaching from Rome, which is pretty fun. So she lives in Alaska, but she's going to be in Rome during the class. So she's never in my time zone, but she's off in the other direction this time. Anyway, should be really great. So I just wanted to encourage everybody to look into this. There is still time. We're getting close. We're only a few weeks away now, but there is still time to get signed up and to participate if you would still like to. The other thing is, don't forget, this being the penultimate class of Boethius. It's time to start thinking towards our next Mythgard Academy discussion, and that is going to be on the Treason of Isengard. Of course, we're going to return to the history of the Lord of the Rings series. Having done the Return of the Shadow before, we're going to do the Treason of Isengard and look as the Lord of the Rings continues to grow and develop, as Tolkien is going to discover things like Rohan and Gondor, right? Lothlorien, places that were, not even conception in his mind, clearly, when he began the story at the beginning. Anyway, it's going to be great fun. There's still time, right? If you haven't read The Return of the Shadow and you're not ready for class, there's still time, right? You can go back and read. You can review the sessions that we did on that. I really encourage us to begin that. Do I have a date yet set, Tomas? Not exactly a date per se, but it should be in July. I'm still kind of debating that, but we'll have the web page and the schedule up soon, so you guys can sign up for the Treason of Isengard. But it's only a matter of a few weeks away. So if you want to start some advanced reading of the Treason of Isengard, there's time. If you wanted to go back and read The Return of the Shadow to catch up with us, there's still time for that too. So, all right, let us plunge into Boethius and the Consolation of Philosophy. Now, I have to start off with an apology. I'm traveling tomorrow again with my family this time, and so it's not conference travel, but family travel this time, and today's one of those like pre-travel days where like my to-do list was like a million things long, and I ran out of time. Tom Hillman has an awesome lingering on the Latin for us today, and I totally just ran out of time. I just didn't have time to put it up on slides. So I'm going to have to hold on to that, and we'll do it next time. Maybe we'll get a double bonus next time, or we can do it next. We can just do that one next time. But it's really cool. It's about one of the poems in Book 3, and it has a Tolkien punchline, so like a Tolkienian punchline, which should be really fun. So I promise we're not going to lose it. We are merely going to delay. So I hope that you will all be able, with being fortified by the philosophy that we learned last week, that you will all be fortified to endure the misfortune of waiting for another week for that. So anyway, again, so I apologize to everybody, but we'll definitely get back to that next time. With that said, then let's jump straight into Book 4. So first, a reminder about where we were. So okay, kind of summarize the beginning of Book 4 that we talked about last time a little bit, right? Basically, Lady Philosophy was saying, if we keep our priorities straight, right? If we can discern between things appropriately, then the picture looks completely different, right? That picture that Boethius was painting in Book 1, not only of his personal misfortunes, but of the problem of evil, right? All begins to look very different. Why do bad things happen to good people? Answer, they don't. Bad things don't happen to good people, right? Why do the bad guys win? The bad guys never win, right? The bad guys are always weak, and the evil are always weak, and the virtuous are always strong, always, right? There's no question about that. All fortune is good fortune, right? So these are the conclusions that she came to, and you'll remember our discussion about those next time. What I want to remind you of especially is where Boethius ended. right? That is the Boethius character ended. The last slide that we looked at last time, the sort of transitional moment there in the middle of book 4, as we shift into a different gear, as Lady Philosophy is going to explicitly say, we're shifting into a different gear. Oh, okay, she's not going to use that metaphor, of course, but she's going to say things to that effect. The Boethius character's response is really fascinating. Right, on the one hand, he says, okay, I follow your arguments and I totally agree. You're absolutely right. I'm completely buying what you've said, right? All fortune is good fortune. Bad things don't happen to good people. Bad guys never win, right? I see all of those things. But I still have a question, right? And my question is, why do bad things seem to happen to good people, right? I mean, he seems to be like, okay, yeah, but like still, like, come on, like seriously though, why is fortune still so chaotic, right? Why do apparently unjust things seem to happen all over the place, right? In other words, he essentially says, I see how from, the big picture, right? Looking at, thinking in terms of ultimate good and what does it really mean? When we talk about bad things happening, what really is a good thing happening and a bad thing happening, right? And so when we're thinking about ultimate good, right, things look different. When we talk about winning, right, bad guys winning, right, or bad guys being strong, well, how are we defining strong? How are we defining winning? If we define winning in terms of getting what you want, what you really want, then of course bad guys never win. He's like, okay, yeah. But things are still chaotic all over the place, right? Why is there apparent injustice? He seems to come back almost straight back to book 1 and says basically, okay, again, I get all of those things, but it doesn't really solve all the problems, right? When I look around the world, it still doesn't make sense. I can't make sense out of it, right? He's like, look, okay, I get it. All fortune is good fortune. That's all good. But come on now. Let's be real. We would all prefer to have what normal people call good fortune, right? I mean, everybody, wealthy, like the wealthy and the poor, the virtuous and the wicked, everybody would really rather be comfortable and happy than, miserable and oppressed. And so why is there a disconnection between those outcomes, even acknowledging all the stuff about the goods of fortune and how it doesn't lead you to ultimate happiness and all that kind of thing, but still, right? Why should there be so much chaos? Tonight we're going to get to her answer, and so in answering it, that's where she's going to take things to a different place. Karita summarizes, I get it, but I still feel like there is bad help. Yeah, essentially. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. Good. Yeah, Stephen has another really good synopsis. He says, logically, the argument holds. So why doesn't it seem to match our observations, right? Why is our experience of the world still so different from that? Why can't we see this? Good. All right. So she's going to answer that question. So let's look at her immediate response. It is no wonder, philosophy answered, that a situation should seem random and confused when its principle of order is not understood. But although you do not know why things are as they are, still you cannot doubt that in a world ruled by a good governor, all things do happen justly. So it's almost, again, it's like in book 1 where she sort of grants his premises, and it's here she's coming back. She's like, remember where you started, because remember Boethius's entire problem at the beginning, like the core of his problem, was not just that he saw injustice all over the place, right? That wouldn't be a problem philosophically. I mean, it might suck, but it wouldn't be a problem if he didn't also perceive that there was order, right? So it is his simultaneous conviction that A, God is in control, and everything seems to happen for a reason, and everything is ordered by a just and good God, and yet there seems to be all this, there's all this injustice all over the place. It's those two things that created for Boethius the problem of evil. So what she brings him back, her first response here is to bring him back to first principles, right? It's no wonder that a situation should seem random and confused when its principle of order is not understood. But although you do not know why things are as they are, still you cannot doubt that in a world ruled by a good governor, all things do happen justly, right? So if on the one hand you know that God is just and the world is ordered, and on the other hand it looks like things are unjust, maybe you should question that latter observation, right? That's her, that this whole fortune thing, this whole chaotic fortune, why? Because remember the basis of their argument, like Lady Philosophy granted the arbitrariness of fortune, right? She's like, that's an intrinsic element of fortune, right? She's arbitrary, right? She's just there blindfold and turning her wheel. Okay. But now she's saying, okay, if we back up with that, right? If we back up from that sum, we'll see actually it might not really look the same if we think about things from a wider perspective, but a different kind of perspective. It's a different sort of widening than she was doing, than she was talking about last week. Cool. Okay. And yes, Jennifer, you're absolutely right. Jennifer Pope says, Boethius seems to be coming at this argument in exactly the opposite way from what modern people do. Most modern people would say things are bad, therefore God must be bad or absent. He says God is good, things must actually be good, we just need to look more closely. Certainly, again, he accepts that. That is not a question. The existence of God and the goodness of God are fundamental premises that he's bringing in, right, from Plato and Aristotle. They're part of the givens that he accepts in this whole thing from the beginning. And I think that it's important to sort of reckon, even if you don't share that premise, right, the important thing is to follow the argument, right? Grant it, just for argument's sake, grant it. Because I do think one of the things that emerges from this is there are a lot of times people will talk about the problem of evil as if it just is very, very simply a proof of the absence or badness of God, right? Boethius's argument, in part, one way, I think, to summarize Boethius's argument about this is to say it might not be that simple, right? Maybe we need to think a little bit more carefully about the assumptions that we're making when we state the simplified problem of evil. And that's what Lady Philosophy is going to go on to do by encouraging us to think about God and God's perspective, which is the theme of tonight's discussion. So, okay. She then pauses for a little consumer warning, right? Then she smiled a little and said, "You are asking about the greatest of all mysteries, one which can hardly be fully explained. This problem is such that when one doubt is cleared up, many more arise like the heads of the Hydra and continue to spring up unless they are checked by the most active fire of the mind. Among the many questions raised by this problem are these: the simplicity of providence, the course of fate, unforeseeable chance, divine knowledge and predestination, and free will. You yourself know how difficult these questions are, but since it is part of your medicine to know these things, I shall try to say something about them, even though our time is short. But you will have to do without the pleasure of verse for a while, as I put together the pattern of my argument." Okay, so she's warning you, much prose to come, right? But, okay, so we're approaching the greatest of all mysteries, she acknowledges, right? Don't expect that all of these things can be fully explained. Now, to some that might seem like a cop-out. I think that saying that's a cop-out is illogical, as Boethius is going to in fact argue. The one thing that you can give to Lady Philosophy is that although she does say these things are not all knowable by us, she never just waves her hand and says we have to have faith in a kind of a vague modern way that modern people use that word. Instead, she says, let us examine logically why it is a logical necessity that we cannot know all of these things and we cannot fully explain this stuff. But that we're going to do next week. So don't worry about that right now. We're going to get there. But she just acknowledges from the beginning, some of this stuff is not going to make perfect sense. And that is going to have to be okay. So she's just sort of throwing that out there as a little bit of a warning, right? And also brace yourself because we're not going to get poetry for a while. Okay. All right. So here she introduces a crucial distinction. A distinction which defines the vocabulary used in theological circles for 1,500 years. We're still using it, okay? Then as though she were making a new beginning, philosophy explained, the generation of all things and the whole course of mutable natures and of whatever is in any way subject to change take their causes, order, and forms from the unchanging mind of God. Okay, now this, of course, is just a restatement of something she's already said, right? She's been talking about God as the source of all things. And remember also another premise that she's using, which, of course, is based on Aristotelian and Platonic philosophy, is that things start off perfect and the imperfect comes from the perfect, right? If something is, if something is imperfect, it almost proves something more perfect than it came beforehand, right? That is the natural order of things. So the idea that the perfect mind of God is the ultimate source of things has been a premise for a while, right? So the whole course of mutable natures and of whatever is in any way subject to change, exactly, Brandon, the unmoved mover. That's exactly it. I'll take their causes, order, and forms from the unchanging mind of God. This divine mind established the manifold rules by which all things are governed, while it remained in the secure castle of its own simplicity. Two functions, therefore, of the mind of God she is pointing to, right? On the one hand, the simplicity of the mind of God, the unity of the mind of God. The mind of God is not divided. It doesn't go part by part. It is completely unified. Why is it exactly that when I am busy driving my kids around and preparing dinner and answering people's emails and communicating with my Signum staff, I forget to buy the bus tickets for tomorrow? Just to choose a random example, right? Why does that happen? Because my mind is not simple, right? My consciousness, my mind is focusing on one thing at a time in this long, today apparently, endless series of things, right? Point by point by point by point, and I can't think about them all at the same time, right? My mind is not simple. My consciousness is fragmented, and of course it's fragmented in many ways, in my case, some more than usual, but over time, right, at the very least. That is one way of thinking about what Lady Philosophy is talking about when she talks about the simplicity of the. It's not simple-minded in the modern sense, right? It's simple and unified. God is able to conceive of all things simultaneously, right? Even the word simultaneous is misleading, right? Because that suggests a relationship to time, which God's mind does not have. We'll get there more later. She's going to talk about the relationship between God and time in more detail later on. But anyway, so just for now, that that concept of simplicity is the one really important element. But notice there's another thing, right? This divine mind established the manifold rules by which all things are governed, while it remained in the secure castle of its own simplicity. While it itself remains simple, it lays out a set of rules by which all of the finite things, which are going to be dispersed through time and space, are going to be governed, right? So it establishes the rules for how finite things are going to, how concrete events are going to unfold, remaining itself simple, Those are the two elements of the divine mind, the two workings of the divine mind that she describes here. When this government is regarded as belonging to the purity of the divine mind, it is called providence. But when it is considered with reference to the things which it moves and governs, it has, from very early times, been called fate. Those are the two big, important vocabulary terms here, providence and fate. Now, again, the point that she's making, they're the same thing. Or rather, they're different ways of thinking about the same thing. They are both of them, both providence and fate, are words to describe God's control over the world, right? God's rulership over the world. God creating the world, not only just in space, but in time, right? God creating and sustaining and ordering the entire world, right? Both of those words, providence and fate, describe that action, but they describe it from different ends, as it were, from different angles, right? When you think about it from God's perspective, from the perspective of the simplicity of God's mind, providence is the word that you use to describe it. When you look at it from the point of view of the things being governed within time, you call it fate, right? So the will of God as it works itself out over time among created things is fate, right? But that same plan, conceived in the simplicity of the divine mind, is providence, right? Okay, those are the basic terms. No, Tony and Nick are both bringing up the question of deism. No. These are not two different viewpoints. This is not a deistic viewpoint. It's a theistic viewpoint, but it's looking at it from it's looking at the same thing from two different angles, right? It's like, well, hang on a second. I was just about to try to make a comparison, but I don't need to make a comparison. We have Lady Philosophy for that. Let's keep reading. Okay. It is easy to see that providence and fate are different if we consider the power of each. Providence is the divine reason itself, which belongs to the most high ruler of all things, and which governs all things. Fate, however, belongs to all mutable things, and is the disposition by which providence joins all things in their own order. Providence is the plan by which all things are going to happen. Fate is the working out of that plan in the lives and experience and bodies, right, of those finite things. For providence embraces all things equally, however diverse they are, however infinite. Fate, on the other hand, sets particular things in motion once they have been given their own forms, places, and times. Thus, providence is the unfolding of temporal events as this is present to the vision of the divine mind. Again, the simplicity with which he sees the whole plan at once, right? In which God grasps everything that's going to happen and everything that's going to be created and everything that's going to happen that is unified in the divine mind. That is his plan, that is providence, right? But this same unfolding of events as it is worked out in time is called fate. Although the two are different things, one depends upon the other, for the process of fate derives from the simplicity of providence. Just as the craftsman conceives in his mind the form of the thing he intends to make, and then sets about making it by producing in successive temporal acts that which was simply present in his mind, so God by his providence, simply and unchangeably, disposes all things that are to be done, even though the things themselves are worked out by fate in many ways, and in the process of time. Okay, the craftsman metaphor is a really important one here. Now, again, it's not a perfect metaphor, right? Because no craftsman, howsoever skilled, has a completely unified mind like as God does. But the metaphor still kind of, the comparison still kind of helps, right? An experienced craftsman says, I'm going to build a chair. And the entire process, right, from like choosing the wood to forming the pieces to assembling them in the order in which they're going to be assembled and the finishing work for the chair and everything, all that stuff is in his mind. So when he says, I'm making a chair, right, all of that stuff together, unified, is what he means, right? He knows what he means, right? He's got that whole plan in his mind. That's providence, right? Fate is that same process from the point of view of the wood that is being made into a chair. And it sees one thing after another happening. And it doesn't understand the plan. It doesn't understand it, right? That those particular planks of wood might not know that their fate is to become a chair, right? In the mind of the craftsman, right? From the providential standpoint, the chair's already there, right? And not only the chair, but all of the steps that are going to lead up to the final production of the chair are all in the craftsman's mind in one unified point. But to the wood, this is a series not only of progressive events in time, successive temporal acts, as Lady Philosophy says, but also kind of mysterious, right? The wood isn't going to get, even if assuming the wood were sentient and perceptive, it wouldn't get it necessarily. It kind of reminds me, and of course this is true for an observer too, especially those of you of my generation. Though as I recall, these bits have been preserved even for present generations. My favorite segments in Sesame Street as a child were always those like the making of crayons in the crayon factory segments and stuff, where like you follow the thing from, or like the piece of metal that's like slowly being shaped, and in the end you see what it is, right? I always loved those bits. And I think they still use the same old segments in the modern day Sesame Street, but it's like that, right? I remember as a child watching this process, and often I couldn't guess, like, what is this thing going to turn out to be? And it's like, oh, like it's an I-beam or whatever. It's a beam that you'd use for building. Okay, I see now how that was shaped. I don't remember the apple cider one, Nick, but I can totally believe it. And Laura, I think they did the same kind of thing in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood as well, but I definitely remember the Sesame Street segments. Sorry. Jennifer says the steel beam one terrified her for some reason. Sorry, Jennifer. I don't want to stir up painful childhood memories there. But anyway, you know what I'm talking about, right? So that's, again, my experience as a child watching those things was totally temporal, right? That was fate, right? Watching fate unfold, and you're the victim of fate, right? I mean, it's a thing that happens. This is the plan being worked out in time, but providence is the original plan, right? When the craftsman looks at the lump of metal and says, I-beam, right? I'm going to make it happen. That's providence. And yes, as several of you are pointing out, and as certainly as I think of all the time, I think that this same thing is, we see this happening in the Aino Indole. Definitely. The music of the Ainur is the playing out of things over time, right? Well, there's a way in which Tolkien kind of plays with it in a couple different ways, right? On the one hand, the conception of Iluvatar that he plans and that he propounds in his initial themes are like providence as well, which, remember, when Melkor messes with the music, and it doesn't seem to come out like it was supposed to, remember what Iluvatar says to him, and says, nobody can alter the music in my despite, right? Like it's not like he had to improvise, right? Iluvatar saw that all coming because he had the providential vision, right? And the music of the Ainur playing out the story of history is like fate, right? Is like that plan being worked out over time, which is, of course, then Tolkien adds that sort of separate level, right? Where the music of the Ainur itself is like a sort of, not quite simple, right? But a sort of Cliff's Notes version of the playing out of fate over time. The music of the Ainur itself acts like fate upon the unfolding of the rest of history. So Tolkien adds a really neat sort of extra level to that in there. Anyway, but I don't want to get too deep into discussing the Aino Indole. But again, you can that same basic relation between the concept of providence and fate, you can see working out there. Yes, no, it shan't work. I know some of you are deliberately trying to goad me into detailed Aino Indole discussion, but that's an application, not a direct discussion of our text here, and we got plenty to work through here. So let's carry on. But do you see what we're getting at, right? You see that this fundamental distinction between providence and fate, super important, right? Super important. Okay, so let's keep going. So this is two ways to think about the mind of God and the relationship between the mind of God and stuff, right? Providence, the plan; fate, the enactment of the plan upon the stuff in time. Okay, fine. So what? Right? Like, how is this practically useful? Right? She says, therefore, whether fate is carried out by divine spirits in the service of providence, or by a soul, or by the whole activity of nature, by the heavenly motions of the stars, by angelic virtue or diabolical cleverness, or by some or all of these agents, one thing is certain: providence is the immovable and simple form of all things which come into being, while fate is the moving connection and temporal order of all things which the divine simplicity has decided to bring into being. It follows, then, that everything which is subject to fate is also subject to providence, and that fate itself is also subject to providence. So there is, in this sense, a causal relationship between providence and fate, right? Just as the plan in the mind of the craftsman is, in a sense, the cause of the actions that he then performs in time, right? Because he sees the chair that he wants to make, and he sees at the same time the process by which he can get the chair out of that pile of wood. Therefore, the plan, the actions, right, the set of actions, fate, the thing that happens to the wood, is caused by providence, by his plan. Providence is the immovable and simple form of all things. Fate is the moving connection and temporal order of all things. Okay, there she's just sort of repeating the definition, reinforcing that. But there's a really important new element here, right? Temporal order of all things which the divine simplicity has decided to bring into being. Why do things happen? Why do things happen? Why does anything happen? Because providence planned it that way. Providence, the plan in the divine simplicity, all events, not just some events, all events are part of the providential plan of God. All events, which the divine simplicity has decided to bring into being. So, back to that first sentence. Therefore, whether fate is carried out by divine spirits in the service of providence, like the planetary intelligences, for instance, or by a soul, like by you or me, or by the whole activity of nature, by the heavenly motions of the stars, by angelic virtue or diabolical cleverness, or by some or all of these agents, one thing is certain: providence is immovable, while fate is the moving connection, right? Providence and fate are happening. So we're not just talking about like miracles, like God intervening in some way, right? All the things done by everybody. There is no kind of event that Lady Philosophy exempts from this list, right? Whether it's on the highest level, right? Planetary intelligences ordering things in the world, right? Which happens, everybody knows that. Or a thing a person decides to do. Or by the whole activity of nature. So if you say like, oh, no, that doesn't happen by anybody's choice. It just happens, right? Like a totally natural event, right? Which you can place. So, the question of like, okay, I mean, think about all of those, movies and stories and things where someone is like, was that a ghost? Or no, I'm sure there's a natural explanation, right? Okay, doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter. It all has a cause, right? Whether you can convince yourself that it has a perfectly natural explanation, but guess what? Whether that event was caused by a supernatural being like an angel or a devil or a planetary intelligence, or whether it was caused by a person, whether it was orchestrated by a person, or whether it was just the result of natural processes, right? Just the way the laws of nature, as we call them, seem to work, all of those things are the result, are part of, are perceived and conceived within the simplicity of the divine plan. right? Those are all providence which are being enacted through fate. So all of those things, planetary intelligences, people, the entire sum of nature, angels, devils, everything, right, are agents of fate. Everything comes from the first cause. Brendan, exactly. Xenia says, is this predestination? Kind of sounds like it, doesn't it? Jennifer says, but what about free will? Good question, isn't it? Right? Spoiler, we're not going to get to it tonight, right? But that's going to be Boethius's final question. As the Boethius character is going to, don't worry, we're going to get there. The Boethius character is going to be like, yeah, but free will. What about free will? Yeah, don't worry. We're going to get there, but not tonight. Is the heavenly bodies of stars a reference to astrology, Tony? Absolutely, in a sense. That is to say, in the Middle Ages, we were pretty convinced that the stars, in fact, impact... Well, okay, the planets impact things. The wandering stars, aka the planets, because they've got planetary intelligences in them who are like really high-level angelic beings, and they do have a certain exercise influence upon the world, right? So they've got jobs, right? Delegated jobs, kind of like the Ainur, quite like the Ainur, almost exactly like the Ainur in some ways. They're delegated authorities, right? They've got some supervision over stuff that happens, here on Earth. So can we? So Tony, do things happen because of the influence of the planets on us? Oh heck yeah, right? Everybody knows that, right? And what's more, Tony, there was a theory that God's providential plan itself is mapped out in the fixed stars, right? So that if you knew how to interpret them, spoiler, you don't. But if you did know how to interpret them, you could read the providential plan in the stars. So did they believe in astrology? Definitely, but within this kind of sort of generally philosophically Christian context. Let's see, James asks, so is fate cast in stone, or is it just whatever happens on the path to providence? No, it's cast in stone. Simplicity of the divine vision, right? At the moment of creation, right? When God created the world, he didn't just create the thing. He just create the world and let it go. He had a plan, right? Simplicity of the divine mind, the entirety of creation, meaning in time as well as space, was uttered by God in that one moment, his simple plan of providence, right? So yeah, he knows all things, and he knows it absolutely certain, right? Because it's all there in the unified plan, right? In the simplicity of the divine mind. So in that sense, is fate carved in stone? Absolutely it is, right? You're not gonna catch the divine providence on the hop. It's not gonna happen, just like with a Iluvatar, right? It's not gonna happen. He sees all things in one unified existence. That's the significance of providence. Good, yes, lots of people worried about free will. I get it. Yeah, it's a concern. All right. Yes, and of course, those of you who are referring to the Eldila, to C.S. Lewis's Eldila in his space trilogy, absolutely, yes, the Eldila are planetary intelligences. That's Lewis's sort of fictional imagination of the medieval view. He didn't make up any of that. Even the qualities that he ascribes to Melicandra and Perilandra and Glund and all the rest of them, especially that scene when the gods descend in that hideous strength, that's straight out of the medieval worldview. Stephen Cover says, read Lewis's Space Trilogy for more. Exactly. Okay. Let's see. Is the name of Mercury Viritrilbia? Am I remembering that rightly? I think it is. But anyway, sorry. Oops, spoilers. Sorry, Lady Gun. I apologize. I just started reading Lewis's Space Trilogy. Yeah, it's never mind. I didn't give away too much. Yeah. No, Viritrilbia is Mercury, and Yeah, no, that's not the frog people. That's something totally different. Yeah, the Fiffletriggy. Exactly. Those are the froggy people. Okay, sorry. Anyway, but I'm not going to get distracted on that either. So we see the practical relationship, and yes, again, those of you who are worried about free will, you've got it in one. You're thinking in exactly the right ways. For now, let it be. Right? We'll come back to it. She's not going to leave that aside. But so try to stop worrying about that and focus on the implications of this whole concept of providence and fate and the relationship between providence and fate. Okay. She's going to spell out some of the implications. Therefore, the changing course of fate is to the simple stability of providence as reasoning is to intellect, as that which is generated is to that which is, as time is to eternity, as a circle to its center. Fate moves the heavens and the stars, governs the elements in their mixture, and transforms them by mutual change. It renews all things that are born and die by the reproduction of similar offspring and seeds. This same power binds the actions and fortunes of men in an unbreakable chain of causes. And, since these causes have their origins in an unchangeable providence, they too must necessarily be unchangeable. So does this mean that the actions of humans are predestined? Yup. Absolutely it does. Right? The same power that has created that ordains the natural order and binds the natural order to act in a particular way, right? Reproduction and, all of the cycles of life and everything else, right? That same power binds the actions and fortunes of men in an unbreakable chain of causes. Now, for a second, glancing back at where we started this discussion, Boethius is saying, why is there any randomness, right? Why should there be any random fate? That shouldn't happen. It doesn't. Nothing is random. Nothing is random. Everything that happens. So all those misfortunes, the turning of fortune's wheel, not random. None of it's random. Okay. Okay, in this way, things are governed perfectly when the simplicity residing in the divine mind produces an unchangeable order of causes. Okay, do this again. In this way, things are governed perfectly when the simplicity residing in the divine mind produces an unchangeable order of causes. This order, by its own unchanging nature, controls mutable things which otherwise would be disordered and confused. So things left to themselves would be disordered and confused. There would be chaos, right? That's what would happen. If not for the fact that behind all things was the perfect simplicity of God governing perfectly all things, right? The nature, that God's own simple nature is unchangeable, and therefore so is the chain of causes that goes from him, the first cause, the first mover of all things, through everything that happens for any reason at any time in the history of the world. Rachel says, is fate the same as love, since love causes all things? No. When we're talking about love, right, love makes the world go round and all that, right, that love is the mechanism by which God governs all things. That's like saying, let's see, this is going to be, no, I'm going back to my craftsman discussion, right? Using Lady Philosophy's craftsman metaphor, thinking about my my expert woodworker and the chair, right? Okay, so if the process of the craftsman shaping the wood into a chair is fate, right? The plan being worked out over time. Love isn't the same thing as fate. Love is like, the tools that he uses. It's like his hammer, right? hammer's not a good illustrator because he's not going to be using a hammer a whole lot in the making of a chair. But you get the point, right? Like the tool that he uses in order to shape the wood is like love, right? So it's so love and fate are in that sense sort of on different levels philosophically. Love is the mechanism in that sense, the actual instrument that God uses to shape things, to make things happen, right? But fate is the description of that entire process. You see what I mean? Exactly. Yeah, exactly, Nick. Fate is a name for the phenomenon. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I hope that helps. Okay. All right. So Brandon says, so how does this square with God being good? That is, if we have all this stuff again, but remember Boethius, that's exactly where Boethius started, right? But like, why does this injustice and stuff happen? You're right, Brandon, that in one sense, this argument that Lady Philosophy has been making, that we've been covering tonight, might seem at first to make it worse rather than better, right? So, okay, so he's like, all right, so God's in control, right? But like stuff seems to be messed up, so how does that work? And she responds by saying, okay, let's make one thing perfectly clear. God is absolutely, inalienably, unchangeably in control of absolutely everything. Okay. Show me where that starts helping, right? That does seem to make the problem worse rather than better, doesn't it? I think that's an absolutely fair, observation, right? So let's give her a chance, Brandon, and we'll see where she takes us with this. Okay. Let's go back to the problem of evil. See, Brandon, you're exactly anticipating Boethius here. But, you ask, now again, the Boethius character doesn't even interject here, right? Lady Philosophy anticipates his objection. But, you ask, what worse confusion can there be than for the good to enjoy prosperity and suffer adversity, and for the wicked also to get both what they want and what they cannot bear? Again, the problem is not that like things are upside down. The problem is that things are messed up. Things are random, right? Some good people get good stuff and some get bad stuff. Some bad people get good stuff and some get bad stuff, right? How can there be a worse confusion than that? If it were just opposite world, right, where bad people always got good stuff and good people always got bad stuff, then maybe we could say, oh, see, no, there is order. We're just wrong about it, right? We you turn it upside down and it's all fine, right? But no, it's not like that. It's just confused. Now, here she addresses it. But is human judgment so infallible that those who are thought to be good and evil are necessarily what they seem to be? If so, why are men's judgments so often in conflict, so that the same men are thought by some to deserve reward and by others punishment? And, even granting that someone can distinguish between good and evil persons, can he, like the doctor examining the body of his patient, look into the inner temple of the soul? The problems of such judgments are similar. For it is a mystery to the layman why some healthy persons find sweet foods agreeable, others sour foods, why some sick persons are helped by gentle treatment, others by harsh remedies. The physician, however, does not find such things at all strange, because he understands the nature of sickness and health. Now, what is the health of souls but virtue? And what is their sickness but vice? And who indeed is the preserver of the good and the corrector of the wicked but God, the governor and physician of men's minds, who looks into the great mirror of his providence and, knowing what is best for each one, causes it to happen? Here, then, is the great miracle of the order of fate. Divine wisdom does what the ignorant cannot understand. Notice where she starts with here, right? To kind of, to paraphrase Lady Philosophy in the words of the Princess Bride, oh, look who knows so much, right? Who are you to say, like, even the basic statement, why do bad things and good things happen to good people? And she's like, hang on, why are you so confident that does happen, right? It's premised upon the fact that you know for sure who the good people are and who the evil people are. And what's more, that you know for sure exactly what they do and do not deserve. Are you sure? Can you really be sure? Do you know that for a fact? Pause a little bit. Exactly, Karita. People are complicated. I know, right? It's like kind of mind-blowing. Remember, a while back, when we were first, I know this was, gosh, what, like class 2 or class 1 even? Probably class 2, I think. We were talking about evil people and good people. A couple of you were complaining that that was really pretty simplistic, right? And I asked you to kind of be patient and wait, that it was going to get better, right? I remember I said she deals first with these sort of philosophical abstractions, right? In a sense, she wasn't yet talking about real people. She was talking in abstraction. So let's just think first about the concept called a virtuous person and a concept called a wicked person. And she talked about those as if they were diametrically opposed to each other and also absolute, like this guy is completely good and that guy is completely wicked, right? And she was doing that in order to consider the concept. That impulse that we have as modern readers is a very modern impulse, right? To say, and because that we're trained to think that way, right? Hang on a second. You can't just use objective terms like that. You can't just call that person good and that person wicked, right? It's totally more complicated than that. And of course, that's perfectly true. But think where the normal kind of modern chain of thought leads to, right? If we start off, if that's our first reaction, right? If Wild Lady Philosophy is in the very first stages of saying, let's think about good and evil. Let's think about what like people deserve and what people desire and all that stuff that she was doing, right? Back in talking about fortune and talking about the goods of fortune and you know, the desire for happiness and all that stuff. If she had instead just said like, so this whole concepts of like good people and bad people, totally subjective, right? Totally oversimplified, not really relevant, then what? We just end up kind of throwing the concepts out the window, or rather we end up not really thinking about the concepts themselves. What Lady Philosophy does is say, okay, hang on. First, let's think about these concepts, right? If you don't think they exist, imagine that they exist, right? Let's think first about these ideas in a pure sort of philosophical state. Then, having thought about those things and the implications of those things and what it means, and having sort of seen what sense all of this makes, now let's return to what is admittedly and obviously a much more complicated practical situation, right? In which, no, we never find pure good and pure evil in any person, right? Some people are always a mixture of one or the other, right? Of both, right? And what's more, not only do we not, can we not, you know, sort of distill that out, right? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde exempted. We are often wrong, just flat wrong. We think that somebody is virtuous when they're not virtuous, right? We can't know any of that stuff. So where does that leave us? Where does that leave Lady Philosophy, right? Where that leaves Lady Philosophy is saying, okay, first of all, we can't know for sure who's good and who's bad. We can't see what the balance of good and bad is, but God can. It's not hidden from God, right? God sees all these things, and notice what she immediately goes to, the metaphor, the very important metaphor, which is really the central metaphor of this entire section, this whole bit in prose 6. The core of this whole section, I believe, is this metaphor of God as doctor, as God as physician, right? She immediately goes to that comparison, right? So, okay, so people get confused, right? People don't understand. Your doctor makes a prescription. It doesn't make any sense to you. My wife is a physician, and it's that one of the struggles of her professional life is trying to convince people that antibiotics are not the solution to every problem. I mean, a lot of people who don't understand how the body works, and that's fine, right? And this happens to, this is not a class thing. It's not a level of education thing. There's a lot of confusion about this kind of thing. You know, there's this kind of general concept that antibiotics are like the magic elixir that makes you better, right? So try and convince somebody who has a viral illness that an antibiotic is not going to help and might indeed in some ways long-term do harm, is an uphill battle, right? Because if you don't understand, as Lady Philosophy says, if you know they don't understand the nature of sickness and health, it's not going to make any sense to them, right? But to one who does understand, it does make sense. So now notice that she is doing two things at the same time. First, there's that question of perception, perceiving who is truly good and who is truly evil, and the balance of good and evil in every person, right? So there's that inability to perceive that we don't, but it's more than just that. With her doctor metaphor, she takes it to the next step as well. It isn't just that God can perceive who is good and who is evil and how the good and evil is intermixed in everybody. He knows what to do about it. He is like the doctor, right? He can not only diagnose the good and evil and the mixture of good and evil, but he can prescribe. He knows how to treat it. Notice how this is going to come back around to the problem, you know, Brandon, that you were raising and that she was just anticipating that you would be raising, right? How is it that a good God can be in charge, in absolute control of the events of a world where things seem to be so crazy and chaotic, right? Her answer? Because we don't know, man. It seems pretty crazy when even malicious, right? When there you are and your kid is really sick and you're trying to convince the doctor to give the kid the medicine so the kid can get better, and the doctor keeps telling you, no, I refuse to give your kid the medicine, right? It doesn't make any sense, right? Because you don't know the nature of health and sickness, right? And the doctor does know. Her implication here already, and she's going to spell it out more later, but her implication here is all of that, what looks to us like random fortune, right? Just good stuff, bad stuff happening randomly all over the place. It's not random. We just don't understand the purpose that it is being applied to. And yes, Josiah, I absolutely agree. Josiah says how important it is. Thinking, you know, often Josiah says often the metaphor that is used of God in this context is God as judge, right? That God can judge between the good and the evil, but Lady Philosophy is Josiah emphasizes the significance of the fact that Lady Philosophy chooses not a judicial image but a medical image, right? God is not about condemning the evil. God is about treating the evil. And that is clearly a crucial element of Lady Philosophy's argument and her entire conception of providence and of fate here. Yeah, Stephen, I agree. That's another great metaphor. Stephen Cover says that for those of us who work with computers trying to explain things to non-technical folk. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Stephen, I'll use my dear wife as an example again. She's one of those non-technical folks, right? So to her, it just looks like witchcraft. You know, she's always saying like, I did exactly the same thing and something different happened. I don't understand why. And it's like, well, exactly, because the conditions were in fact not identical, although it might have looked identical to you, right? So yeah, exactly. If you don't understand the nature, right, of the software involved, then it's not gonna make any sense to you. Yeah. Okay. So okay. All right. Yeah, good. So Brandon says, I really like the idea that God is handcrafting remedies depending on the person. Exactly. It recasts the problem, showing God is taking a lot of care when dealing with evil. Yeah, absolutely. Let's look at her explanation for how this works out a little bit more. Take, for example, the man so fortunate as to seem approved by both God and men. He may actually be so weak in character that if he were to suffer adversity, he would forsake virtue on the grounds that it seemed not to bring him good fortune. Therefore, God, in his wise dispensation, spares the man whom adversity might ruin, so that he may not suffer who cannot stand suffering. Another man who is perfect in all virtues, holy and dear to God, may be spared even bodily sickness, because providence judges it wrong for him to be touched by any adversity at all. So there are some cases in which God allows good things to happen or to carry on happening to people. Why? Because God, who can see things and knows the nature of sickness and health, right, and knows how to treat things, deems that it is best, right? Why does this one person that she points to there at the beginning, why does everything seem to work out really well for that person? Does it mean that he is like intrinsically awesome and God is just like approving his awesomeness? No, it might mean the opposite. It might mean that he's weak, and God knows he can't handle it, so he doesn't give him what he can't handle. Gentle treatment for that one, right? He does not put him in a position where he knows providence, got the plan, knows what's going to happen, right? Knows that he would fail. God's not going to put him in a position where he knows he's going to fail. So yeah, doesn't do it. So there are some people to whom good stuff happens, right? It often happens that supreme rule is given to good men so that infectious evil may be held in check. To others, providence gives a mixture of prosperity and adversity according to the disposition of their souls. She gives trouble to some whom too much luxury might spoil. Others she tests with hardships in order to strengthen their virtues by the exercise of patience. Some people fear to undertake burdens they could easily bear, while others treat too lightly those they are unable to handle. Both types are led on by providence to find themselves by trials. Some have earned worldly fame at the price of glorious death. Others, by not breaking under torture, have proved to the world that virtue cannot be conquered by evil. No one can doubt that such trials are good and just and beneficial to those who suffer them. So when bad stuff happens, is it just random badness breaking out? No, it's not. But now notice a couple different things here. One, we still have God as the physician of that individual person, right? Looking at the middle here. Some people fear to undertake burdens they could easily bear. The people themselves, it's not just that we can't judge other people, we can't judge ourselves, right? We don't know our own selves. So there are people who they're afraid that they can't bear something. God knows in his providential plan that they can bear it, right? But they don't think they can. Others treat too lightly burdens that they're unable to handle, right? They think they can handle it. God knows they can't, right? Providence, by distributing prosperity and adversity appropriately to those people, like the physician prescribing the treatment, right? Both of them, what did you say, are led on by providence to find themselves by trials, right? They are put through which push them, right? And teach them to learn about themselves the things that they didn't know, right? Again, so that's how the treatment works. But wait, there's more. It's not just the treatment it's not just about the treatment for the individual people, because of course that's not how the world works. It's not that simple. That is, this isn't, the whole scope of history and the parceling out of prosperity and adversity to different people and different measures and at different times is not a one-on-one transaction between God and each of those individual people in isolation, right? That's not how it happens. There are other people involved. There are always other people involved. Anytime prosperity or adversity is dealt out to anybody, it affects many, many other people, right? As, for instance, when supreme rule is given to good men so that infectious evil may be held in check, for instance. We know that sometimes wicked people are put into positions of power, sometimes good people are put into positions of power. Seems awful random. Shouldn't it? I mean, if, again, back to the original argument that he was making at the end of last time. And she says, it may seem random because we don't get it. Because we can't possibly see. We can't even judge this in the heart and mind of one person, even ourselves, right? Much less can we understand the chain of causes that's going to ripple outwards from any one act of any one person, and how it's going to affect everyone else around them. But you know what? Providence sees all those things, right? So why in this one place does a good man achieve supreme rule, right? It may be that there was some infectious evil that needed to be held in check, right? That many, many people would have suffered terribly had that not happened, right? And the suffering of those people would have had other, again, ripple effects and on everybody else, right? But it is part of the divine plan. We're gonna quell that, right? So we're gonna give so can you think about that one event, right? That one event of supreme rule being given to that one particular good man in that particular time and place, right? And it has an effect on him that is personally calculated to suit the state of his own soul, right? By the divine physician. But also, of course, that one action has an impact on everybody else in the kingdom, right? And that fact is part how that good ruler acts towards the people involved in the infectious evil, or the people who would have been victims of the infectious evil, right? All of those people and how they are impacted by the acts of the good man who is put in power there are all also part of the individual plan that the providence had for those individual people, right? All of those, the entire chain of causality perceived simultaneously in the simplicity of the divine mind. All of this stuff is foreseen and works together. So, the point is the divine physician thing doesn't just apply to the individual soul. It also, it's also about how everything affects everybody else as well. Okay. Thomas, no. Boethius does not forget the Book of Job. Lady Philosophy is very cognizant of the Book of Job. Lady Philosophy's favorite part of the Book of Job, however, is what God comes in and tells Job at the end, which is the really crucial thing, right? When God comes in and says to Job at the end, after Job has been voicing, Job and Boethius really should be read together. I mean, they're both dealing with the same thing. Why does bad stuff happen, right? Why does bad stuff happen to good people? That's what Job is concerned about, right? And remember, Job's friends are all saying, "Oh, they don't, right? Bad things don't happen to good people. Therefore, you must be bad. Bad stuff has happened to you, so you must be bad. So cough up, Job, right? Come on, could just confess, right?" And he's like, "No way, man! Like it's fine. Like I'm good." Yeah, exactly. So. Yeah, but what's the answer, right? What's God's response at the end? Where were you when I laid the foundations of the universe? If you can explain all these things that I'm going to go on for like 4 chapters describing, if you can explain all these things, then we can talk, right? And that is what Lady Philosophy is saying, right? God's providence conceives all of these things. God perceives all these things, and he understands how they all fit together. Do you? Right? Nah, Job didn't really understand. Right? How could he? Nobody really understands. To us, it looks random. It looks completely messed up. And Lady Philosophy says, it's not. It's not. God is the physician. Okay. Carita says, speaking from experience, it doesn't make a suffering person feel better to be told it's because God knows you can take it. Just if anyone is wondering if that's a good tactic. I hear you, Carita. And the thing that I would say here, remember, this isn't what Lady Philosophy said either, right? there's a reason this is happening at the end of book 4 of this book. And remember Lady Philosophy's gentle treatment and stuff at the beginning, right? Lady Philosophy doesn't. There are good reasons why Lady Philosophy doesn't jump to this, right? This is not because in essence, you remember she's answering the very first question he asked. This is the direct response to book 1. But it took her until here to get there, right? So even if you're taking the Lady Philosophy approach, which, Karita, I agree, is not the best way for everybody. Not everybody's going to be ideally consoled by Lady Philosophy, right? That's just not the approach that everybody needs in every circumstance. Right? You've got to know the nature of sickness and health, right? And how to treat different kinds of people in different kinds of circumstance. But even if a little dose of Lady Philosophy is what the person does need, Lady Philosophy doesn't jump there, right? So yes, that kind of I rather agree. Xenia is wondering about foreknowledge and predestination. Great question, Xenia. We'll get there. Book 5. We'll get there. Yeah. Several of you are thinking about it's. Several of you are being reminded of various C.S. Lewis passages. Yes, yeah, absolutely yes. There is. If you go through the works of C.S. Lewis and highlight in a particular color when he's coming back to a Boethian concept, you'll paint a lot in that color. Absolutely. Yeah. Good. Yeah, good. Sorry, lots and lots of comments. I'm trying to stay ahead of them. And I have to. It's particular. I mean, as you guys know, I've been doing this for a long time, and I don't usually pause so carefully to read over all the comments when a whole lot come in. I know, and I always say I can't always get to them all. But this is some deep stuff that we're in right here, and I wanted to make sure, again, thinking back to the sort of apology slash, request for clemency that I was asking for at the beginning about knowing that this stuff touches on some really sensitive nerves and some really painful experience for a lot of people, possibly very present experience for a lot of people. I'm sort of more leery than usual of just kind of skipping over people's comments, so I'm sort of reading with a little bit more thoroughness than I am wont to do in the middle of class. Let's see. Laura asked a great question about where Paul in the New Testament talks about not being tested beyond what you can handle, right? Not being tempted beyond what you have the strength to resist. That where God provides a temptation, He always also provides a way of escape. And she's asking, is what Boethius is talking about similar to that? Is that the same kind of thing? In a sense, Laura, yes. In that, again, Paul is alluding there to the idea that God can not only perceive, but judge appropriately, right? Can measure appropriately what to give to all people in all circumstances. So in that sense, yes, absolutely. Lady Philosophy isn't exactly talking about temptation here, but temptation certainly does come into it. I mean, again, if you think about that passage there in the middle about others treating too lightly those that they are unable to handle, right? It's talking about burdens there, not temptations. But again, I think a similar thing kind of comes in, right? Like just sort of knowing what's good for you and knowing what you can handle. God knows. So Laura, it's not that she's saying exactly the same thing. I guess I would say Lady Philosophy is saying sort of a larger thing, of which that particular teaching of Paul would be like a subset of this, if that makes sense. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah, some of you are talking about addressing, I think, that idea about the chain of causation, right? About one thing happening leading to another, but all of this being sort of part of the plan. Kay is talking about sort of the link of causation from, me getting handed a copy of The Hobbit when I was 8 years old to, the founding of Signum University and the community that we've built at Signum. Yeah, they're directly causally related, right? But of course, I never could have seen that coming, right? And the great good fortune that fell upon me, right, in the lifelong love of Tolkien that I discovered, right, which I would have considered and do consider a personal blessing, right, has of course also had, an impact, I hope, on the whole positive, on many other people. Yeah. Karita says, thinking of Job, we should probably also file curse God and die under the category of bad advice. That yes, Job's wife. That's never really been a role model that one could recommend with any confidence. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's carry on. Moreover, so more illustrations along the same kind of lines. Moreover, the lot of the wicked, which is sometimes painful and sometimes easy, comes from the same source and for the same reasons. No one wonders at the troubles they undergo, since everyone thinks that is just what they deserve. Such punishment both deters others from crime and prompts those who suffer it to reform. So again, notice how she's explicitly addressing that question of it's the thing that happens, right? The providential plan, the manifestation of fortune, as we look at it or think about it, is calculated to fit the state of the person, but also providence is considering the effect on others, right? Okay, so let's imagine a wicked person again, right? And some good stuff happens and some bad stuff happens to them. When bad stuff happens to them, nobody's surprised, right? Everybody thinks it's just what they deserve. And good things can come of that, right? Punishment both deters others from crime and prompts those who suffer it to reform. So it can have a good effect on others in deterrence. It can have a good effect on them, right? In prompting them to, on the wicked person, in prompting them to reform. So the bad stuff that happens to them, if they get their just desserts, that's good, right? On the other hand, the prosperity of the wicked is a powerful argument for the good, because they see how they ought to evaluate the kind of good fortune which the wicked so often enjoy. So what about when evil people prosper? Well, that's good too, right? Good comes of that as well. What good comes of that? It causes us to rethink the goodness of wealth and good fortune, right? Remember all that stuff that we were looking at back in books 2 and 3, right? About the goods of fortune? And not being deceived by those, not being tricked into thinking that the goods of fortune are our real home, right? Well, seeing these good things coming as a reward to people who manifestly don't deserve them helps, right? Helps us to have that moment where, although we might still be like, the man who's drunk as a mouse, still when we might knock on the door and say, oh, wait a second. Hang on, this actually is not my house, right? And we might turn around and keep looking. Anyway, still another good purpose may be served by the prosperity of the wicked man. If his nature is so reckless and violent that poverty might drive him to crime, providence may cure this morbid tendency by making him wealthy. When such a man recognizes his viciousness and contrasts his guilt with his fortune, he may perhaps become alarmed at the painful consequences of losing what he enjoys so much. Right, so it could have a good effect on the person as well. Again, now notice, Lady Philosophy isn't saying this is what always happens to everybody. The whole point is everybody's different. But she's saying, like, here is one possible way in which it could happen. Her only argument is against oversimplification. She's not making an oversimplification. She's arguing against it, right? So you can't look at happy, rich, wicked people, right? You can't look at those people who have gotten wealthy by stepping on the necks of other people and just say something really simplistic, right? You can't just look at it and be like, see, that shows that everything is unjust. No, because you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen, right? And here's an example, right, of a thing that could happen, right? Brandon, yeah, I was just thinking a similar thing. Brandon's saying this is perfect for people who think that Tolkien is too simplistic. Yes, people reading Tolkien make the same kind of mistakes all the time, mistaking his characters for totally good or totally evil and thinking that his story is a really simplistic black and white story. It's really not. Good. Yeah, David Etley says, sees the echo of Tolkien later on in the same paragraph. It is the divine power alone to which things evil are also good. Yeah, we're going to get there, David. But yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about that sometime. I don't know what else to say about that, but let's talk about that sometime. Yes. Yeah, again, Brian has said this seems like a rather optimistic hope for the wicked. Yeah, again, she's not saying, and this is how it works. This is the key. She's just throwing out examples, right? Illustrations of how it can happen. Why you can't oversimplify. Why you can't say bad people. If the world were just and orderly, bad people should get bad stuff and good people should get good stuff. And she says literally every single step of those statements, you're talking about what you don't know about, right? You don't know who's good and who's bad, and nobody's totally good and totally bad, right? It's a balance of each. So it's way oversimplified from the beginning, right? But even to say good things that you do should receive a good reward and bad things that you do should receive punishment is an oversimplification, because that's not always how it works. That's not in every case with every person going to be what is calculated by a good physician to bring about the most positive result, right? So again, it's an argument against oversimplification, and she's just sort of throwing out illustrations about why you can't overgeneralize like that. Nick says, so no karma then. I mean, I don't want to go to karma, because I don't want to take the concept of karma totally unjustly out of its whole philosophical context. But certainly the common Western conception of karma. Exactly. Yeah, Brandon is saying karma is such a misunderstood word. I agree. I don't understand it myself, but I understand enough to know that it's very generally misunderstood and misused. But thinking only of the kind of bastardized Western version of karma, right? That idea that what goes around comes around, right? And if you do bad stuff, you'll get paid out for it. That's the same kind of oversimplification. I mean, it's based on exactly those same kinds of oversimplification, right? That concept, as it's articulated so often, it delays the temporal demands for punishment, right? It's kind of a way around it by saying, okay, I'm okay with the fact that bad people don't get their just desserts right now, as long as they get them eventually, right? As long as what goes around comes around sooner or later, it's okay. Well, okay, sure, but that's still the same oversimplification, right? In the end, you're just deferring it. And Lady Philosophy is arguing against that entire concept. Good. Exactly, Kate. Kate says, and we've just spent many books realizing that what the world may call good is only at best a fraction of the real good. Yes, only a piece of it taken out of context often. Absolutely. Anyway, okay. Like I said, I'm not addressing the actual doctrine of karma. I'm just referring to that one very common Western usage of it. But anyway, okay. Rachel asks a great question. So is it possible to determine if someone or some act is wicked? Does this mean that it is impossible to make judgments as humans? Yes and no. Do I think that this means that you can't actually have any applicable concept of good or evil? No, I don't think that at all. Again, that's why she didn't go here right away. she acknowledges like the concepts of good and evil and the basic sort of premise of, so that yes, like there are such things as virtues and vices, and those are objectively, those objectively exist, that there are good ways to act and there are bad ways to act. But what she does insist upon, Rachel, is that we can't categorize people with any confidence, because even the people who seem to be good people by the definition of good that we hold, even assuming that definition of good is accurate and objective, it might not really be true, right? They might be fronting, right? We don't know what's actually in their hearts. So again, first, we can't really... So the place, Rachel, where it's impossible to make judgments as humans is on the souls of people, because we can't see the souls of people, right? So Lady Philosophy does say that is impossible, inappropriate for humans to try to make judgments on the souls of other humans. But she also says it's impossible for us to understand all of the implications of a thing, right? So if we look at what happens, if we look at the consequences of an action, it's easy for us to leap to a conclusion and say, well, that sucked. Like, evil came of that, clearly, right? Did it? For everyone? Always? Do you know what's going to happen as a consequence of that 20 years from now? Right? No, we don't know. We can't know. Right? So in that way also, we can't evaluate. Again, it's not about evaluating people's actions morally or good versus evil, but saying a thing that happened was good, right? Or bad. Again, I shared at the beginning of class that someone in my family was just diagnosed with cancer literally hours before I began the first Boethius class. That's an example, right? It's very natural, right? Very tempting to look at that and say, well, that's bad, right? This is not a good thing. This is clearly a bad thing that just happened. This is a piece of ill fortune that has occurred to us. Is it? Can we know? Are we sure? How is it going to impact the life of the person diagnosed? How is it going to impact the life of the lives of the people close to the person diagnosed? How is it going to end up impacting other people totally unconnected yet? Right. 10 years from now. We don't know. And we can't judge that. So, Rachel, that's the other way in which Lady Philosophy is asserting that it's impossible for us to make judgments as humans, because we can't see all those causes. God can. Simple mind of God, the unification of providence, perceives all of those things and how they work. Okay. All right, good. So let's keep going. I'm at risk of not finishing my slides after just having boasted about that. Okay. From this condition, the highest providence often brings about the miracle by which the wicked make other wicked men good. For when they find themselves unjustly persecuted by vicious men, they burn with hatred against them and return to the practice of virtue, because they cannot bear to be like those whom they hate. So like a person who tends to be a bully might, upon being bullied by somebody else, realize how much that sucks and cease to be a bully themselves. So the wicked action of a wicked person to them brings about goodness, right? Brings about conviction and change to virtue in that case, right? Only to divine power are evil things good, when it uses them so as to draw good effects from them. So does God make bad things happen? Yeah, God makes bad things happen. All the good fortune, all the bad fortune in the world, part of the providential plan, right? Why? Because God doesn't care? Because God isn't good? No. Because he uses them so as to draw good effects from them. Ultimately, the plan, the whole picture, is good. We can't see it, right? We can't see the whole picture. We can't even see a significant piece of the picture. Indeed, we can't even truly see any of the picture, because every bit of the picture that we do see, we're only seeing in bits and not seeing how it fits together, and not even really perceiving its true nature, right? So, yeah, all things are part of a certain order, so that when something moves away from its assigned place, it falls into a new order of things. Nothing in the realm of providence is left to chance. Nothing in the realm of providence is left to chance. Okay. Let's keep going. Thus, and this is in the poem now, mind. So we finally have come to the end of the prose. It's time to refresh ourselves with some poetry again, right? And this is, I didn't do the entire poem. This is the last 3 paragraphs of the 4 that Green renders the poem in. The first one is about the order of the heavens, right? About how the moon and the sun stay in their spheres, right? And everything goes around in harmony. Thus, mutual love governs their eternal movement, and the war of discord is excluded from the bounds of heaven. Concord rules the elements with fair restraint. Moist things yield place to dry. Cold and hot combine in friendship. Flickering fire rises on high, and gross earth sinks down. Impelled by the same causes, the flowering year breathes out its odors in warm spring. Hot summer dries the grain, and autumn comes in burdened with fruit, and then falling rain brings in wet weather. All of the cycles of the world, all of these things, hot and cold, wet and dry, all of the different seasons are all elements of the plan, all, different, to use a different metaphor, all different colors, right, on the palette of the painter who is painting the picture, right? There's another providence and fate metaphor, right? Providence is that vision that the artist has in their mind that they're trying to get onto the canvas. Fate is the actual application of the brush. There you go. Who was it asking about love? That's much better than the hammer, right? Love is the brush that the painter uses to apply the paint onto the canvas. That's a much better metaphor for love and its relationship to fate, whereas fate is the entire process of painting. Anyway, but the point is, all of these things are colors on God's palette. All of these things, and, hot, cold, wet, dry, life, death, things we call good fortune, things we call bad fortune, all of these things are colors in God's palette, which he puts together to make an overall good picture, even if we cannot always see its goodness, because how could we possibly, given that we are tiny, tiny little specks who can barely see. It's like, pointillist painting, right? Painting with all those, made up of little dots, right? If we're so small that all we can see is one tiny little dot, how can we possibly expect to understand the painting and the role that that dot has and, plays in the larger painting as a whole? Anyway, okay. This ordered change nourishes and sustains all that lives on earth, then snatches away and buries all that was born, hiding it in final death. Meanwhile, the Creator sits on high, governing and guiding the course of things. King and Lord, source and origin, law and wise judge of right. All things which he placed in motion, he draws back and holds in check. He makes firm whatever tends to stray. If he did not recall them to their true paths and set them again on their circling courses, all things that the stable order now contains would be wrenched from their source and perish. He not only keeps everything ordered, he not only structures everything. Notice that itself is described as being good. It's not just that he sets them in a good direction, right? But his ordering is itself good. If God didn't order things, everything would be wrenched from its source and perish. He recalls them to their true paths. The good physician treating souls, right? This is the common bond of love by which all things seek to be held to the goal of good. Only thus can things endure. Drawn by love, they turn again to the cause which gave them being. All right. Yeah. Good. Exactly, Timothy. Yes, Timothy points out the business about him maintaining all things in their path emphasizes how this is not deistic. Yeah, exactly. I didn't get into it before, but that's why I was saying no. Don't think about providence as a deistic thing. It is absolutely. It's like the opposite of that. Deism being the idea that God creates things and then let it go and doesn't interfere with it anymore. That's a really crude a version of deism, but just to give the basic concept of what deism means. Lady Philosophy is saying as something as hard to the opposite of that, I think, as you can possibly make. God, as Lady Philosophy describes him, is about as undeistic as any description I know of. Okay, cool. Let's keep going. After this, prose 7 of book 4 is the really interesting moment where Boethius comes back and says, hey, can we turn this into like common language, right? He's like, I get all this, but no one's going to believe us if we talk this way, right? So let's think about this from the human point of view. And she goes through the similar argument about all fortune being good fortune and everything being calculated for the good, and talks about it in sort of simpler ways which are more tied to human examples. Here's sort of the conclusion of that bit. A wise man ought not to regret his struggles with fortune any more than a brave soldier should be intimidated by the noise of battle, for difficulty is the natural lot of each. For the soldier, it is the source of increasing glory. For the wise man, it is the means of confirming his wisdom. Indeed, virtue gets its name from that virile strength which is not overcome by adversity, and you, who are advancing in virtue, should not expect to be weakened by ease or softened by pleasure. You fight manfully against any fortune, neither despairing in the face of misfortune, nor becoming corrupt with the enjoyment of prosperity. Hold fast to the middle ground with courage. Those who fall short or go too far are scornful of happiness, and are deprived of the reward of labor. You can make of your fortune what you will, for any fortune which seems difficult either tests virtue or corrects and punishes vice. Now, pause for a second to notice how completely mind-blowing this is. When Lady Philosophy says, okay, let's think about this again from the human point of view. We've been talking from about providence, right? And God's perspective on things all the way through here so far. So let's talk about it from the human point of view. Look where she gets to, right? You fight against fortune, neither despairing, hold fast to the middle ground. Those who fall short are what you can make of your fortune what you will. You can make of your fortune what you will? Well, that sounds pretty free will-ish, doesn't it? When she talks about this from the human point of view, she's talking about like what you do matters. Like what you decide matters. Right? That it's up to you to fight against fortune. That it matters whether or not you understand, that it matters what your attitude is to fortune and to what happens to you. She speaks as if that matters, as if you can change your fate in some way. You can make of your fortune what you will. That's pretty explicit, right? Jennifer, yeah, you can decide to take your medicine or not. Seems that way, right? When she comes back around to the human point of view, she comes straight back on that. She's not going to explain that right now, right? But she's not going to leave it behind. This is, again, her acknowledging there's an issue here, right? And the Boethius narrator is eventually going to come around to it. Now, almost done. We're finished with book 4. That's the end of book 4. Starting in book 5. I was tempted to just stop there, but I wanted to do this one because there's going to be plenty to talk about when we get to free will and predestination next time. This time I wanted to end with the one, because there are two sort of primary clarifications, two sort of corollaries to the teaching that she's just been giving. In a sense, she's done. Lady Philosophy has addressed the why do bad things happen to good people. The good physician metaphor is the answer. Okay, that's Boethius's answer to this question. And by the way, as I have said before, I find Boethius's answer to the why do good things happen or why do bad things happen to good people question, his answer to the problem of evil is the most satisfying one that I know of. He's given his answer, right? Lady Philosophy has given the answer, but there's still unfinished business, right? The unfinished business is still with the two primary correlations that come up, two questions that the answer raises that are really disturbing. One is the big one that you guys have wanted to get to and which we're not going to get to today. What about free will, right? But there's another one which he starts with, and I wanted to get that out of the way now, and then we'll do free will next time. And that is, what about chance? What about luck? We all talk about that. What does that mean? When Philosophy had finished her song and was about to turn to the discussion of other matters, I interrupted by saying, "Your exhortation is a worthy one, and your authority is great, but I know from experience that you are right in saying that the question of providence involves many other problems. I should like to know whether there is any such thing as chance, and if so, what it may be. I have been trying as quickly as possible to carry out my promise to show you the way back to your true country. These other questions are somewhat beside the main point of my argument, even though they are quite important in themselves. I shouldn't want you to become so wearied by side trips that you were not able to complete the main journey." She's a little concerned, right? But she's going to do it anyway, right? By the way, you get geek bonus points if you can, without looking it up, recognize my quotation there, which is my subtitle. Anyone recognize that? If chance is, this is Lady Philosophy again. If chance is defined as an event produced by random motion and without any sequence of causes, if that's what we mean by chance, right, then I say that there is no such thing as chance. Apart from its use in the present context, I consider it an empty word. For what room can there be for random events, since God keeps all things in order? The commonplace that nothing can come from nothing is true, and the old philosophers never denied it, though they did not apply it to the effective cause of things, but only to the material subject, is a kind of foundation of all of their reasoning about nature. But if anything should happen without cause, it would seem to come from nothing. And if this cannot be, chance, as we defined it a moment ago, is impossible. Nothing happens for everything has a cause. Everything has a cause. Nothing just spontaneously happens. Can't occur. Can't occur. Doesn't make sense. It's not Gandalf, though it sounds like something Gandalf would say. It's not Obi-Wan Kenobi, though it sounds like something Obi-Wan Kenobi would say. Jennifer, you're right. It's from C.S. Lewis. It's from C.S. Lewis. The hermit of the marshes in The Horse and His Boy says to Erebus, "My child, I have lived 109 years in this world, and I have never yet met any such thing as luck." Anyway, sorry, for some reason that the hermit saying that popped into my head when I was looking at this slide. So, okay, technically, right, literally chance meaning a random event. Nothing is random. So in a sense, we can see the answer to the question pretty clearly based on what she said about providence and fate, right? The fact that nothing has no cause. There is nothing that exists outside of the providential plan of God. There is nothing that, God looks at and is like, whoa, holy cow, where did that come from, right? So in that sense, no, there's no such thing as chance. But she does acknowledge that there is a way in which we can talk about chance. It's not like we have to stop using the word chance entirely, right? We can still talk about chance in a sense. And here's the sense that she says it's kind of okay to talk about chance. Whenever anything is done for one reason, but something other than what was intended happens on account of other reasons, it is called chance. For example, when a man digs the earth with the intention of cultivating it and finds a treasure of buried gold, this is thought to happen by chance, right? Pretty lucky, right? There you are plowing, your plow hits something and it turns out to be a box of treasure, right? Wow, right? It's your lucky day. There's a bank error in your favor, right? Excellent, okay. But it does not come from nothing. Since the event has its own causes, it's not truly random, right? There's a reason you found the treasure. Why? Because you were digging in that field. and there was gold in that field, right? And the gold was there for a reason, right? So there's causes. You can trace the chain of reasoning all the way back, right? It does not come from nothing, since the event has its own causes, whose unforeseen and unexpected concurrence seems to have produced an effect by chance. 4. If the farmer had not dug the ground, and if someone had not buried his gold in that spot, the treasure would not have been found. Those are the causes of the fortunate accident, which is brought about by the coincidence of causes and not by the intention of the one performing the action. Right? So yeah, to the farmer plowing in the field, it's pretty random. Box of gold in the field, right? Stroke of fortune, but it's not random, right? So often the unintended, unforeseen consequences of actions bring about events which we call chance. From the point of view of, as Chaucer liked to say, the high tower of providence, right? Chaucer in his translation uses that metaphor of a high tower, where providence is like one who sees the whole land from a high tower, and fate is like when you're walking through the land yourself, right? So anyway, so from the high tower of God's providence, there is no such thing as chance. But in our own day-to-day experience, because we cannot see the chain of causes that leads to stuff, things look pretty darn fortuitous. For neither the man who buried the gold, nor the man who was cultivating the field intended that the money should be found. But as I said, it happened coincidentally that the farmer dug where the other had buried the money. Okay, so that is how chance really worked. Yeah, exactly. You find it, as Nick points out, you find the ring because Gollum dropped it, right? The finding of the ring by Bilbo being an unintended, a fortuitous event. Certainly not intended either by Gollum or by Bilbo. But random? Nah, probably not. Probably not. Yeah, Tony says, how does this relate, though, to the way that luck is treated in The Hobbit, where luck is treated like a personal possession? Well, Tony, the main thing that I would remind you is that Bilbo's wrong to think of it that way. That's the point that Gandalf makes at the very end, right? All these events were not organized for his personal benefit, right? He's a very fine person, and Gandalf is very fond of him, right? But he's really a very small person in a wide world. Exactly, yeah. He's he does seem to think of luck as something. He is the luck wearer, right? But he doesn't actually wear luck. And we can see The Hobbit provides illustration after illustration of this kind of luck, right? Notice, and not to mention that, also providence in the way that Lady Philosophy was describing in Book 4, right? Think of all of the things in The Hobbit. I've made this argument lots of times and make it in my book, that think of all every time something catastrophic happens to Bilbo and the dwarves, right? It turns out not only to be not a disaster, getting waylaid by goblins remember, there's the one good path you can count on, and Gandalf and Elrond know the one good path, so they go up the one good path, and then they get taken away from the path because they're kidnapped by goblins, right? And so they end up going out the back door and ending up in a totally different part of the wilderness than they meant to be in, right? But they find out later that path actually sucks and wouldn't have gotten them to where they needed to go. So it was pretty lucky in the end. It ended up being a stroke of good fortune that they ended up where they were, right? And the same happens with Bjorn and his path, right? It seems like a pretty terrible stroke of bad fortune that they end up kind of almost starving to death and then leaving the path and getting kidnapped by spiders and then by elves and lose their whole path. But of course, then the narrator reveals to us that had they stayed on the path, had they obeyed Gandalf and Bjorn's injunctions not to leave the path, that path would have ended up dumping them into the bogs, and they would have been unlikely to survive and make it through. So in the end, as we learn at the beginning of chapter 10, they arrive at the Lonely Mountain by the only good path, which happens to come out the barrel hatch of the Elven King's Hall, is the only way that they could have ended up getting through Mirkwood. So Tolkien gives many examples of this stuff which appears for very, very good reasons at the time to be a stroke of bad fortune, which turns out in the larger providential plan to be, in fact, a blessing, a stroke of good fortune. It doesn't make it less uncomfortable. It doesn't take away from the fact that almost starving in Mirkwood really sucked, right? Getting captured by goblins was truly terrifying. They were in real danger, and those were bad experiences. But in the end, it's those things that took them on the one path that Providence had laid out for them, bringing them right to where the thrush was going to knock at just the right time. The fact that luck, as it is mentioned and sort of deployed throughout The Hobbit, is really Tolkien's treatment of providence. Providence, in really exactly the way that Boethius describes, was one of the core arguments I was trying to make in my Hobbit book. Yes, Brian. Brian says, chance or luck is about the disconnect between your purposes in doing something and the purposes that Providence has in causing certain events to happen. Yeah, absolutely. So she gives a new working definition of chance. Therefore, we can define chance as an unexpected event brought about by a concurrence of causes which had other purposes in view. These causes come together because of that order which proceeds from inevitable connection of things, the order which flows from the source which is providence and which disposes all things, each in its proper time and place. So yes, everything is part of the divine order. But when we don't understand the causes and we don't see how they fit together and it seems to happen serendipitously to us, we still call it chance. So we can define it an unexpected event brought about by a concurrence of causes which had other purposes in view, right? Okay, that we can call chance. And so I have already talked about The Hobbit as an illustration of that, but I couldn't resist doing one other. This is Gildor and the Fellowship of the Ring. Now you should be grateful, for I do not give this counsel gladly. The elves have their own labours and their own sorrows, and they are little concerned with the ways of hobbits, or of any other creatures upon earth. Our paths cross theirs seldom, by chance or purpose. In this meeting there may be more than chance, but the purpose is not clear to me, and I fear to say too much. Gildor is recognizing that he's in a Boethius Book 5 situation here, right? He wasn't searching for the hobbits. His meeting with the hobbits was by chance, by Boethius's definition, right? Unforeseen by either one of them, right? But fortuitous, right? Very lucky that they happened to meet each other just then when, the Black Rider was sniffing his way towards them through the underbrush, right? So that worked out pretty well, right? Gildor recognizes this. Our paths cross theirs seldom, cross the paths of other creatures upon the earth seldom, by chance or purpose. So sometimes our paths cross them on purpose, like we go to seek out other people. We don't do that often, but it happens sometimes. Sometimes our paths cross by chance, like today, right? When we were just walking this way and you were just walking this way and a Black Rider just happened to be pursuing you and we all came together at the same time and place for reasons unforeseen by us, right? In this meeting, there may be more than chance, right? He's like, but so it's not just luck, right? Don't consider this a random thing. It's not a random thing, but the purpose is not clear to me, and I fear to say too much. One of the reasons why Gildor is so chary about giving advice is he doesn't understand. He knows. He's read Boethius, right? He knows what he doesn't know. He on the one hand, he recognizes there's no such thing as chance, right? This didn't happen randomly. It couldn't be more obvious to Gildor that this meeting did not happen randomly. But he doesn't know why it happened exactly. He does not see the causes. For what reason? What is the place that this meeting has in the larger plan of Providence? He doesn't know. And he knows that he doesn't know. So he's like, I'm not going to act as if I do know what I don't know, right? Exactly. And Evan is noting the fortuitous chance. He had just been thinking of this passage and was just talking about it, and then I had a slide on it. So, right, exactly, by chance, right? So again, we can see this, everybody, all of the passages that so many of you guys like so much, and have quoted on several occasions here in the comments here tonight about this, chance, if chance you call it, and all that stuff. All the references to luck, all the references to chance, in Tolkien, all of them. I mean, every single one of them, I think, come back to this passage in Boethius, are really, it is in his treatment of luck and chance where I think that Tolkien's thought is most purely Boethian. There are other places like, when we talked about the Ainulindale and the way that he's kind of playing with these concepts of providence and fate there. It's derived from the conceptions there in Boethius and that basic terminology. He's sort of playing with and considering those concepts, but it's not like pure Boethius, right? The chance of chance you call it stuff is absolutely pure Boethius. Exactly this kind of, what was it that she said? Concurrence of causes which had other purposes in view, right? That's exactly what is happening pretty much every time that we see stuff happening by luck. And once you begin to see this, you can see this all over the place in Tolkien's writing, even when he doesn't explicitly draw attention to it, right? Think about the abduction of Merry and Pippin, right? And them being, Gandalf does draw attention to this one, right? Them being swept across Rohan and brought to a place where they never meant to go, just in the nick of time to rouse the Ents and help bring about the fall of Isengard, right? Providence's plan being played out through time, seeing fate happen, right? Seeing the order of providence coming about, but the people involved not understanding, right? They don't understand the causes. They don't know what's going on. It's all in Boethius. What do they teach in these schools, Brandon? I completely agree with you. Good. All right. And that's me getting through my last slide again. Excellent. Very good. So next week is the big one, right? Week 7, our last week on Boethius. We're going to finish the book and we're going to do the free will question, right? So we will come. So join us next time when we ask Lady Philosophy, but wait, how can the choices of human beings actually matter in shaping their destiny if everything is all predetermined by the foreknowledge of divine providence? See you next week, and we'll talk about that. And as Boethius's answer to this question is the best answer that I know of. Almost everybody else who addresses this problem just dodges it. Boethius addresses it in, I think, a really, really interesting and really compelling way. Thanks, everybody, and I will see you guys next week. Bye now.